I think that actually the Gaza protests played a big role in what happened with TikTok, right? Because the narrative around
Yeah,
TikTok is that it was Chinese owned and they're somehow collecting data on people. But I think, what actually happened, and this came out in, various statements from, people in Congress and whatnot, was that people were seeing alternative views on the genocide in Gaza,
yeah,
and that really put a target on TikTok and other networks like Telegram, for example, because people were getting this alternative perspective that just wasn't welcome in the American media landscape. So, would you agree with that? Do you think that it was really the Gaza protests that put a target on TikTok?
yes, absolutely. I mean that we kind of saw like Senator Mitt Romney sort of said that like quiet part out loud, saying that, the nationwide ban was overwhelmingly connected to the volume of mentions of Palestinians on TikTok.
I mean, typically, the Israelis are good at PR. What's happened here? The way this is played out on social media has dominated the narrative. The emotion, the impact of images dominates. Some wonder why there was such overwhelming support for us to shut down potentially TikTok or other entities of that nature. If you look at the postings on TikTok and the number of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media sites, it's overwhelmingly so among TikTok.
So I like found that, this like a egregious threat of censorship and control is like, people that were being activated politically by the content that they saw on TikTok, and that scared our government like crazy.
Yeah, the dynamics of it are interesting because, it seemed like it was sort of a slingshot effect where there was a lot of censorship around things that Donald Trump was saying, right? Around, claims around the 2020 election or, things that supporters might say again about COVID, or the Ukraine war. Like there was a lot of censorship, especially initially around that. So, MAGA sort of got this reputation as being pro free speech, and, they were gonna, again, like Elon Musk was going to liberate social media from this sort of censorship. But you know, I think that now with what's happening with Gaza, especially, that's really undermining any claims that MAGA would have about championing free speech. Because when it's on behalf of Israel, everything seems to go out the window, and we have this defunding of colleges that Trump is pushing currently. We also had him again. It was funny too in that address he recently did before Congress. He was on the one hand saying these things about I brought free speech back to the U.S., but by the way, any Gaza protesters, we're going to deport them and charge any American protesters with crimes. And then he put out a statement, saying something to that similar effect and no masks and whatnot. So, yeah, it's really crazy because it seems as especially on that one topic, free speech is not tolerated by the Trump administration.
No, not at all. And yeah, I mean, it's particularly frightening. I think, yeah, Trump's crackdown on pro-Palestinian speech in particular is ramping up. And the recent arrest just over the weekend of a Columbia graduate student, Mahmoud Khalil, by ICE, was a really troubling example. Just sort of signaling like this intensified effort not only to suppress campus activism, but also criminalize pro-Palestinian advocacy, like more broadly. And I think another concerning element to that story was Columbia University's inability or unwillingness to confirm whether ICE had a warrant before detaining Khalil. So that, raised a lot of concerns about, institutional complicity. Um, and then, yeah, Columbia's response combined with the administration's move to revoke federal funding, suggests sort of that these institutions may not even be willing to or able to shield students from government overreach. And it's a really chilling and alarming precedent that this sets. If the government can justify deporting student activists and um, defunding institution based on their perceived failure to curb like anti-Semitic speech, which often is just criticism of Israel, then we're looking at a dangerous expansion of like political repression. And that isn't just like one student or one school. this could embolden crackdowns on academic freedom and um, First Amendment rights all over the country.
Do you think there's any chance that, if they really do continue deporting activists and, maybe charging Americans with the crime of expressing their First Amendment rights, do you think there's any chance that you may see some, corporate media coverage and, I guess, the Democratic Party pushing against that? Because, again, on the subject of Israel, we've seen them in such lockstep with that Zionist approach. It's, it kind of on the one hand would be against them, but again, they're so anti-Trump. You figure, this would be a great opportunity for colleges and the media to push back against something like that in the Democratic Party. But again, it's sort of like where they're caught in a hard place where they can't really do that because if they do, then they'll get charged with being anti-Semitic.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, that's, and I think that is like the goal, of course, is like to scare people enough that it will stifle whatever they expect them to say or criticize. I mean, and I think that's like Trump's whole thing is like, silencing speech that he doesn't agree with. He's made journalists the enemy of the people, and this constant hostility. And that's, I think, where independent media is, how I find incredibly courageous in that way. But it's also, scary to think that these are organizations also in jeopardy for what they choose to report on. Um, I do hope that, the Democrats step up and defend the marginalized against a truly terrifying figure, and all of his, minions, that are working to stifle freedom of speech and many other, horrible things in recent weeks. But I hope, that there'll be some looking out for the rest of us. But I don't know. Maybe I feel hopeful about a lot, but I feel really cynical, I think, about the Democrats in particular. I
Well,
just
yeah, I mean, there's no real precedent for that. Again, just going back to the Iraq War, after a couple of years of intense protests, what happened was that, initially these protests it was just a grassroots movement of people. And then slowly over time, Democratic politicians started showing up at these protests. And then, eventually it led into Barack Obama running against the war in 2008. Also Democrats getting elected in 2006, being against the war largely. But then once Obama was in office, just adopting a lot of those Bush era policies and expanding the drone war, expanding domestic spying, all of that. So, um, yeah, I think long term, there's not necessarily much hope there, but I guess it just speaks to sort of the cognitive dissonance a bit on the liberal side, just because they have an opportunity here to really take the Trump administration to task on this specific issue and have a groundswell of support, especially among younger voters, and activate those younger voters who are drifting, in the last election, drifted more over to the Trump side. But again, I just don't know if they're going to do that on this issue. It seems as though they'd rather, pick their battles and, have it be more about Ukraine or other kind of issues that they're more comfortable with than talking about Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that, I guess, even, with Kamala's campaign, was just this unwillingness to listen to the concerns of voters, particularly around Gaza. And this like campaign strategy of like, well, I'm not Trump, so and it's like, it's ineffective, it's uninspiring for younger voters who are hoping for a future that, we're we're thinking about climate change, we're thinking about, all of these things that, and LGBTQ rights and immigrant rights, and there are so many things, and women's rights, and so many things that were just like um really downplayed. And I just hope maybe that serves as some kind of lesson to um to the Democrats to not underestimate, how plugged in young people are to the issues that matter to them, and to their futures, and to, really listen. But I also think what's really important on you know, on the voter side is like that there can't be this sort of engagement in politics only during elections. There's like, it's really not an option to tune out and disengage when an election is over. There has to be, this constant responsibility to pay attention and engage in protests and mutual aid and all of these things that we can do to strengthen our communities, because that's really, I think, where, the power is to get to know those issues in particular, because we've seen electoral politics just, won't save us.